بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. الحمد لله الذي رزقنا أن نهاجر في سبيل الله وننضم في هذه الدولة الإسلامية في العراق والشام، ونحمد الله الذي رزقنا وجمعنا مع هؤلاء الأسود دولة الإسلام في كل مكان. والحمد لله الذي رزقنا أن نبايع أمير المؤمنين أبي بكر القريشي البغدادي حفظه الله. يا أميرنا، لقد بيعنا على السمع والطاعة وبيعنا على الموت، فامضي بنا حيثما أمرك الله. ونقول للطواغيت والكفار في كل مكان، نحن نقول لكم كما قال إبراهيم عليه الصلاة والسلام لأبيه: إنا براء منكم ومما تعبدون من دون الله كفرنا بكم وبدا بيننا وبينكم العداوة والبغضاء أبدا حتى تؤمنوا بالله وحده. ونقول لكم كما قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم: إنما جئناكم بذنب فأبشروا يا أيها الكفار. والله العظيم لنطهر الجزيرة منكم يا أيها الأنجاس، ونفتح البيت المقدس منكم يا أيها اليهود، ونفتح روما نحن كالبني إسحاق، لنفتح روما والأندلس بإذن الله تعالى. هذه جوازاتكم يا أيها الطواغيت في كل عالم. والله نحن مسلمين، نحن مسلمين، نحن مسلمين.
من وريد القلب تروي عندما كل الهضاب نخضر الله وجوها لم تزل مثل السحاب.
So dig this. A man was bulldozing a bog in central Ireland the other day when he noticed something unusual in the freshly turned soil. Turns out he'd unearthed an early medieval treasure, an ancient book of Psalms that experts date to the years 800 to 1000. Experts say it will take years of painstaking work to document and preserve this book, but eventually it will go on public display. Now here's the kicker. The book, about 20 pages of Latin script, was allegedly found open to Psalm 83. Now, if you're a scholar, as you know, Psalm 83, God hears complaints that other nations are plotting to wipe out the name of Israel.
O Assyrian, the rod of mine anger, and the staff in their hand is mine indignation. I will send him against an hypocritical nation, and against the people of my wrath will I give him a charge, to take the spoil, and to take the prey, and to tread them down like the mire of the streets. Howbeit, he meaneth not so, neither doth his heart think so, but it is in his heart to destroy and cut off nations not a few. For he saith, Are not my princes altogether kings? Is not Calno as Carchemish? Is not Hamath as Arpad? Is not Samaria as Damascus? As my hand hath found the kingdoms of the idols, and whose graven images did excel them of Jerusalem and of Samaria, shall I not, as I have done unto Samaria and her idols, so do to Jerusalem and her idols? Wherefore it shall come to pass, that when the Lord hath performed his whole work upon Mount Zion and on Jerusalem, I will punish the fruit of the stout heart of the king of Assyria and the glory of his high looks.
It seems to defy logic. The speed at which ISIS not only invaded parts of Iraq and Syria, but also how quickly the terror group has penetrated the American psyche. Yet it wasn't until 2011, with Syria's civil war, that the terror group began to evolve into what we see today. Extremists looking for a cause and a battlefield.
Fighters start to come in from Saudi Arabia, some of the other countries in the regions, North Africa, Tunisia, Morocco, even Egyptians and Libyans. And then Europeans start to come in, and some trickle, if you will, from North America.
All of a sudden, the group now known as ISIS had a global image. Roughly 10,000 fighters making sweeping gains this summer and taking more territory than al-Qaeda and its affiliates ever did. What Robert McFadden, a former NCIS chief, calls a veritable blitzkrieg.
It's kind of a sweeping, a bell movement of vast swaths of territory that it controls. Now, controlling it and keeping it are two different things, as well as governing that territory. That remains to be seen.
And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled.
Unknown gunmen have killed at least 5 Egyptian soldiers and policemen in 2 separate attacks in the north of the volatile Sinai Peninsula. 3 soldiers on leave were traveling in a taxi when they were ambushed and shot dead. The other incident happened in Rafah, in which gunmen stopped a car carrying 2 police conscripts and killed them. Violence has been on the rise in the Sinai over the past couple of years. Egyptian authorities blame it on al-Qaeda-linked militants.
The audio we just heard from Egypt, the most populous country in the region. You have the most feared, largest militant group in Egypt now pledging allegiance to ISIS, with the words, "We call on Muslims everywhere to join the Caliphate and help it succeed in obedience to God." Why is that so significant, that you now have the most feared terrorist group in Egypt joining forces with ISIS?
This is Anza Bait al-Maqdis. It's a powerful jihadist group in Egypt. It was formed in 2011. It's grown stronger because of the crackdown of the generals on Islamists. It's been able to recruit because of that. It's mainly based in the Sinai region. Why should we be so concerned about it? They could start going after American tourists in Egypt right now. ISIS wants them to do that to retaliate for these US airstrikes against ISIS in Syria and Iraq. This group, Anza Bait al-Maqdis, they already killed an American back in the summer in a carjacking.
Which, by the way, is a pretty frightening thing when you consider the fact that, at least by our understanding, ISIS in Syria may only have 2 Americans at this point. One of them, a woman, that they are desperately, one would imagine, looking for Americans. So if they are able to find another place to find them, that would be empowering for them.
That's absolutely right, and we're seeing a sort of expansion, and also in Libya, in this town of Derna. They've basically taken control of this town, which is on the southern shore of the Mediterranean, just 200 miles south of Crete. That is now basically an ISIS stronghold.
And Seth, what's your reaction to that when he talks about a new ISIS stronghold? I want to show everyone the map again. The territory where ISIS is growing, the failed states, but you're now looking at Egypt, you're looking at Libya, in addition to countries like that. Libya obviously would probably classify as a failed state at this point. Why is the ISIS message resonating?
Well, Aaron, I just came back from this region and South Asia as well, looking at this question. And I would say one of the things that people have taken note of, including both in Libya and in Egypt, is that they've conducted battlefield successes. Unlike al-Qaeda, which has been pushed back in Pakistan, which has been pushed back in Somalia with al-Shabaab and in Yemen, what ISIS has done is increased its control of territory really since June. I mean, it's been pushed back in a few areas, but that progress on the ground against Iraq and against a U.S.-backed and a coalition-backed Iraq is something that gets people's attention, and has actually, what we're seeing is this competition now between al-Qaeda in some of these areas and ISIS reaching out to jihadist groups on the ground.
Keep not thou silence, O God. Hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, Come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. The tabernacles of Edom, and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagarenes, Gebo and Ammon and Amalek, the Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre, Asser also has joined with them. They hope in the children of Lot. Selah.
ISIS is not only gaining support in places like Egypt. Jim Sciutto is out front. And Jim, the ambition here is for an Islamic state. How far does ISIS now reach?
Well, Aaron, they've got a good start. As you know, They have this base now in Syria and Iraq. They started in Iraq as Al-Qaeda in Iraq, moved over to Syria, kind of blossomed in Syria, then swept down through Iraq earlier this year. Barbara spoke about concerns now that it is establishing a base in Egypt, here in the Sinai Peninsula, but also they have established a base in the town of Darna in Libya. Why is this happening now? One, it's a product of success. Success breeds success. There's success in establishing the Islamic State here as energized support in other countries. But two, and here's the interesting thing, Aaron, it's also returning fighters from who are originally Egyptian, went to fight in Syria for ISIS. When they go home, that's when they try to form a base of support there and then pledge allegiance to the original organization. Same thing happening in Libya. A lot of Libyan fighters fighting in Syria and Iraq for ISIS. When they return home, they establish their own base. So it's a different kind of threat of that returning foreign fighter than we've talked about before.
So Jim, what is the concern for the West? Obviously, when you're looking at a place like Egypt, which I believe second biggest source of revenue is tourism, a lot of it from tourists from the West. You now have ISIS cells and operating, pledging allegiance there. When we've seen these tactics like beheadings, no doubt that is going to have an influence on tourism. But how concerning is this for the West?
Extremely concerning. I'll tell you, when I speak to intelligence officials, this is one thing they watch, the number of failed states that are spreading around the region. When you look at them, Iraq, at least this portion of the country, largely a failed state. Syria, certainly so. Portions of Egypt now, questions of how much government control. Virtually all of Libya, you can argue, with some exceptions, a failed state, but it goes worse than that. Yemen, this eastern part of Yemen, virtually under the control of extremist groups. Then, of course, you have concerns about tribal areas of Pakistan, portions of Afghanistan, and then down Somalia as well. All of those areas, potential bases and existing bases for extremist groups, make it a heck of a lot easier for them to train, to attract support, money, etc. And the concern is plot attacks on the West.
And now over to Egypt, where a car bombing in the northern Sinai has injured at least 10 civilians in the city of Al Arish. Medical sources state 2 of the injured are in critical condition. It was the first violent incident in the region since the Egyptian army started an operation to create a so-called security buffer zone in the area near the border with the Gaza Strip. The army made the move in response to a bombing that killed and injured dozens of soldiers in the region just over 2 weeks ago.
We think of ISIS, Jim, and ISIS is Syria and ISIS is in Iraq, but now you have a militant group in Egypt, the predominant one there in this hugely important country, vowing loyalty to ISIS. What can you tell us about this?
Yeah, this is a big deal. One, it just shows the international appeal of ISIS as it has won successes in Iraq and Syria. It becomes, the new star terror outfit. We've seen that in their recruiting numbers, particularly of foreign fighters, 1,000 a month, and that has not let up with the U.S.-led air campaign. In fact, there's some that believe that this U.S.-led air campaign will actually increase recruiting because they see ISIS is standing up to the West and its powerful military. But now you have this Egyptian group that to this point has been principally focused on attacking the Egyptian government and military, now swearing allegiance to ISIS. The worry here is, does that group then take its campaign against civilians, which has been ISIS's strategy, and that's a big deal. Egypt is a very powerful and populous country, but it's also a country that Americans, a lot of Westerners visit. Will this bring those kinds of attacks to a place that many of us might visit someday? But also, would it threaten this government? Remember, Egypt is a U.S. ally. It's an Israeli. It's got diplomatic relations with Israel. So it shows that ISIS has power beyond its power base now, and that's a disturbing development.